Hey guys, Matt here. Welcome to Learn to Discern. You know, one of the unfortunate byproducts of living as a sinful human is that we far too often try to justify our sin to ourselves. I know this from experience. I have done it with a variety of different sins, and I've used numerous different justifications that I thought were good in my mind, and obviously they were not. But one sin that I have done this with in the past, and it's a sin that I think other people have done this with as well, is the sin of anger. I have attempted in the past to justify my anger, and I've done it numerous ways. As I said before, sometimes it may be saying, oh, what I'm experiencing is righteous anger, when in fact it is not. But I think a primary way that I've done it, and I think other people do this as well, so I want to share it because I'm hoping it can be beneficial, and you might think through, is this something that I have done in my own life? I think we can attempt to justify our anger by describing it as something that is different than what it is in reality. So for instance, instead of saying, I am angry right now, or I am dealing with anger, we can try to convince ourselves that we're dealing with something that's less than anger. We might call it frustration. You might say, I'm just annoyed right now. I'm just a little bit bothered. Oh, that's a pet peeve of mine. We come up with this different terminology because sometimes I think it can be that we feel more justified in that. Yeah, I'm not really acting in a sinful way. It's something below anger. And to be fair, maybe there could be times when what we are experiencing has not risen to the level of anger, wherever that line is. That is a possibility. But even with those times, if you said, oh, I'm just a little annoyed by something, I think we would have to acknowledge that often that is the root that would later on, if left unchecked, turn into sinful anger. And I think probably more often we are actually dealing with anger already in those situations. And when we attempt to justify it or describe it as something different, the byproduct of that is that we end up pushing off dealing with the issue of anger because we're convinced it's not a big deal, and it lingers and lingers, and it becomes a much bigger problem down the road. I want to read for you right now one verse from Proverbs chapter 17. This is verse 14, and I read it in my Bible reading this morning. It says, "The beginning of strife is like letting out water, so quit before the quarrel breaks out." So how does a strife start? Well, here it says it's like the letting out of water. You can imagine this big container and there's just a small crack in it and water's just dripping out a little bit at a time. Sure, it starts off and it seems like not that big of a deal, but eventually the whole thing just breaks. It bursts apart. That's how it is with strife. I mean, strife is obviously caused a lot of times by anger. So it is left unchecked. There's the small problem and you don't deal with it, and it builds and builds and builds until the entire thing explodes. Some of you know my background. I served for approximately 7 years as a youth pastor, and during that time I was able to speak a handful of times to the students about the topic of anger. And one of the things that I would say to them, and I think this is true, is that if you could imagine anger on a scale from like 0 to 100. So 0 is I am completely unbothered by anything. I said very rarely are you going to go from 0 to 100 or even 0 to 80 right off the bat. If you're in a perfectly good spot and somebody comes and says something very inappropriate or that would make you upset, it typically doesn't go straight to that very extreme level. Normally, anger is a very gradual thing. So it starts off in a conversation, you're in a disagreement with somebody, and they say something and it gets under your skin. See, that's another one of those terms that we can use. It just gets under your skin a little bit. But you say, I'm only at a level 10. Obviously not that you would be cognitively thinking this, but you're like, I'm not really that upset right now. It's not a big deal. I have it all under control. So there's some more back and forth and they say something else. Now you're at a 20. And it keeps going, and eventually you're going to reach a point where you very likely are going to start adding coals to the fire because you're saying things that are getting them more upset, and it's going back and forth. Eventually, you reach what I termed the point of no return, which is you basically just lose all control and you start doing things that you would never do in your right mind, but there you are doing it. And oftentimes it is caused by the fact that we did not deal with our anger quick enough. So I just want to put this out there for you. It is good if you're wanting to deal with anger, but don't wait until it gets to this extreme mode. Don't think that anger can only be defined as something that is this intense raging emotion. No, when you start to feel the first inclination of something in your heart, whether you would term it anger or something else, you realize something's off here. I'm not as content and happy as I should be right now. That is the time to deal with the situation before it spirals out of control. So you might think about ways that you can tactfully remove yourself from a situation. You're having a conversation with somebody and they've said a couple of things that are annoying you a little bit. Is there a way to get out of that conversation without causing a scene, without disrespecting the other person? I've actually seen and known people who, if they're having a conversation, they're getting a little bit upset, before the other person can visibly tell that they're bothered by it, they'll excuse themselves. I have to go to the bathroom. Get out of the room. Pray. Make sure that you're getting your mind right. You recognize, hey, I need to forgive this person. God has forgiven me for all the things that I have done, so that you can come back in and have the right mindset. But regardless, you need to deal with issues right away. In fact, it says in Scripture, do not let the sun go down on your anger. And that contextually is even talking of a righteous anger. Why? If left unchecked, it will lead to sinful behavior. And oftentimes our anger in and of itself is sinful. A lot of the anger that we experience is not even righteous anger. And so I just want to put that before you today, hopefully as a help. It's something I want to be mindful of in my own life. I don't want to try to excuse away the anger that I might be feeling. I want to deal with it at the first sign, because I don't want the reservoir to break open. I don't want it to burst and lead to more and more sin. Okay, guys, I hope this teaching today is a blessing to you. If it was a blessing and you want to help get content like this out to more people on the internet, please go ahead and take a second now to subscribe to my channel. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, God bless.